Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this playbook episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand, and I'm here in studio with my friend Mark Costaglo. And today, folks, you got a couple of playbooks coming at you in a row. And this first one is going to talk about what is a good sales manager, how do you identify them within your organization, and then how do you groom them and ultimately place them in the role without causing a ton of internal thrash. Mark, why should people listen?
If you're going to grow a sales org, you're going to have to hire managers. And the number one reason people quit is because of their manager. So I would say this is one of the most key skills that a sales leader can have is how to identify, groom, and put in place a great sales manager that's going to help your team perform better.
Alrighty, Mark. So let's start at the top by just defining the job of a sales manager. I think a lot of people, they're raised to want to be a VP of sales, to want to be a CRO, to want to be a manager, when many of them, frankly, would be much better off and enjoy their life much more if they just stayed as reps. And so how do you look at the job of a sales manager?
Yeah, and let's be really pinpoint with our definition here is manager is a manager of reps. A director is a manager of managers. So we're going to talk about managers of reps, not managers of managers, because I would argue that the rep to manager leap is a very different job and a lot of transition. The manager to director leap is almost as big. Like learning how to manage managers is not trivial just because you knew how to manage reps, just like because you knew how to sell means you know how to manage reps. So that's something that's important to understand. So to me, I boil a manager's job down to one thing, the word efficacy, the ability to affect change. Can you change mindset? Can you change behavior? Can you change skill sets? Can you change somebody's energy? Can you change culture? If you can't change something, then you don't get to be a manager in my book. That's like the number one thing that's most important.
So when it comes to enacting change, getting reps to change their behavior, if we were to get tactical around the common activities or the titles or the hats that a manager needs to wear, I think a lot of people, again, they look at it and they're like, my job is to do one-on-ones, pipeline reviews, and jump on sales calls, right? Those are some of the things. But what are the big pillars of the manager job title?
I mean, besides the obvious, you need to hit your number. I mean, that's an undercurrent in any sales roles. Like your number's king. We can't escape it. At the end of the quarter, your ticket gets punched, and that's what your scorecard is. So other than that, I would say like the biggest job of a manager is to develop talent. So I always say that it's the rep's job to do hard work and to be coachable. And it is the manager's job to turn those two things into results. And so if you can't, as a manager, take somebody who's coachable and works hard and turn that into results, it might mean that you're not a manager. So the first thing is that talent development. Can I create change by making sure that I am creating results based on the effort and the coachability of the rep? It's just like a complicated role, man. Yeah. It's just got so many things to it. Like you need to have your numbers hat on. You have to have your people hat on. You have to have on, how do I manage down? How do I manage up? I'm a problem solver, but my problem solving or my solution has to be inside the construct of my executives' framework of how they do things and inside their system. So a sales manager, in a way, is like your first step into a job that is, the job title is probably not going to be sufficient to what you're going to do every day.
The way that is helpful for me to think about it is I think of the life cycle of a rep. And at every step of that life cycle, the manager has a job. So the first thing that you do is you hire a rep. And so you need to be good at hiring. The second thing you do is you usually onboard and train a rep. And so you need to be involved in their training and be able to ramp reps. From there, once they're actually up and running in the field, you need to be able to coach them. You need to be able to jump on calls, watch calls, do pipeline reviews, things like that. Once they're actually going out in the field, they're closing deals, you need to be able to help with things like forecasting and process, right? So there's a degree of rigor around, again, pipeline reviews, managing the forecast, and managing the calls across multiple reps. And then the final thing is eventually these reps are going to be promoted, or you might have to have harder career conversations with them. The last thing is you're a coach when it comes to their professional development. And so if you think about where you're trying to level up as a manager, or if you want to become a manager, you can sort of think about yourself in those different buckets of, would you be able to train a rep today? Would you be able to dig in on someone else's forecast? Or do you only know how to do this stuff for yourself? And so my question for you, Mark, is when you think about some of the jobs that you've described, what are some of the characteristics that you look for in a good sales manager? And maybe we can start just in general, and then we can talk about how you find those within your organization.
Sure. In general, what I'm looking for is someone that can describe to me why they do something. So when I'm looking at across my reps and seeing, all right, who's the next manager that I need to be developing? Who's the next person that we need to be pulling up into leadership? It's, can they explain how they do discovery to me in a way that I'm like, oh, I might want to try discovery that way. Can they describe their outbound prospecting and pipeline creation? Can they describe how they negotiate? It's this, I understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and I can communicate it to someone else. I've met so many reps, Armand, that are really great, but they're not sure why they're great. And they definitely can't explain it to somebody else and communicate it. And that is going to be a manager that's set up for failure. There's no way that a rep who can't explain how they do things to someone else can explain to someone else how they should be doing things. And they're very interrelated. So I would say that's the start. I'm going to go through the things that they do and see if they actually understand why they're doing it and why it works.
For me, this is number one, far and above. It's conscious competence. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, every once in a while, this isn't the case, but oftentimes the number one rep, they're just so freakishly good that you can't possibly explain every bit of what they're doing, or they can't explain what they're doing. And the problem is then oftentimes they'll get really frustrated when they're trying to teach a rep what they do. And then what happens is they end up becoming super reps, where they basically just do backseat deal driving. So I know a lot of people are probably familiar with the common mistake of you shouldn't hire the super rep to be a manager. But I think there's an opposite example that people will fall into, which is average or mediocre rep who's really good at noticing what other people are doing, but might not be a good rep themselves. Mm. So for you, in your mind, does a rep need to be an excellent rep to qualify for a manager, or would you take an average rep who's very consciously competent?
So I think it's, do you actually believe the two jobs are different? Mm-hmm. If the two jobs are different, it's okay to be a bad rep and you could still be a great manager. You can be a great rep and be a great manager. You can be a great rep and be a horrible manager. Like, all of those are on the table. I fundamentally believe teaching people and coaching people and managing people how to sell is a fundamentally different job than being a seller yourself. And let me give you a perfect example of that. Probably one of the top, if not the top, sales leader I've ever worked with is a guy named Nate Broom. He ran the SMB segment at Outreach. It was a complete machine. They beat their numbers every single time. Every time that I had another segment that needed help, Nate would figure out how to find an extra $2 million in revenue to cover. He started out as a SDR manager, and I brought him in to be an AE manager. He had never really had a bag, like for real SaaS bag, but he instantly became my best manager of people. And then he worked his way up to director to VP. And then after I left Outreach, he kind of replaced me and was managing a huge swath of the business. And so I would say, I don't know if Nate was ever a great rep, but man, was he a great sales manager and a great sales leader.
So can we talk about, in the case of Nate, or in the case of anyone who wants to become a manager, I know conscious competence is one bucket, but there are probably other buckets that made Nate extremely respected on the sales floor. So when you think about their relationship with everyone else on the sales floor, what are you looking for in a manager?
Yeah, so Nate was my numbers guy. He could drill into a dashboard and drill into a set of numbers and make a complicated concept very clear with data. And so it's funny, when we were kind of really starting to scale and go crazy at Outreach, I had Nate, who is my analytical leadership experience, could manage with the numbers, hold people accountable, was great at difficult conversations. And then I had Alex, who was on a show recently. Alex was my culture soft skills guy. And he would be the one that would be like, oh, come on, let's go for a walk. Nate would be more like, hey, look at the whiteboard up there. It tells you exactly what you need to do. And the numbers tell me why you need to do it, right? These two balanced each other out a ton. But in addition to having that ability to lead, you also need to have, I think, a real strong anchor skill. It can be soft, like culture, or it can be hard, like numbers and analytics. But like for me, it's process. I'm a process operational leader. my own life has tons of process. Like this morning, if I didn't put on my deodorant before I brushed my teeth, I'd have forgot to put on my deodorant this morning. It's that bad. But you have to have that anchor skill that relates directly to how you lead a team. And we had John on a show recently, and John talked about this same thing, man. Like, what's your style? And that style will permeate the culture and how you do stuff. And so when you're bringing somebody into the management, does their style either help yours and accelerate it, or does it complement it in a way that you are shoring up some weaknesses? And that's really important. So make sure not only can they know what they're doing and it can explain it, not only can they create change, but does their style fit into your style in a way that like accelerates the entire culture of the sales team or not?
You can build an entire team around a superpower. And I think about this a lot in sports too, is if you are best in the world at one thing, you can build a team around being best in the world in that skill. If you have an outstanding running game in football, you can build an entire team around your running game. In wrestling, if you have an outstanding double leg, you can build an entire setup game around avoiding other types of shots and only getting to your double leg. It's really hard to build a championship team that is just sort of okay at everything. And so for me, confession, I suck at the metric stuff. Like we just had John Scher on, we were talking about the dashboards, and my head was freaking spinning, which is why I asked so many damn questions around what's actually on the dashboard, what are you looking at? Because it doesn't come super naturally to me, even though I'm a quantitative person. It's just, it's too removed from the action. But I know that my superpower is breaking things down in a way that is simple to reps, and then getting them really fired up when we're teaching that stuff. And so I needed to rely on other quantitative folks like the Nates of the world, or I had a really solid RevOps ace where he was the person that was like, Armand, this is what the metrics are telling me is the problem in our organization. Go solve that problem. And then I'd be like, great, I'm going to go solve that problem. I trust that you had this stuff figured out. So let's talk about one other hard situation when it comes to selecting managers within your organization. So let's go back to that super rep example. You get a rep who's super talented, and they're like, I want to be a manager. And you just know, like they're doing it for the wrong reasons. Maybe it's for ego reasons, but they are just like not consciously competent. And the problem is they're the number one rep. So you need to retain them in your organization. You can't just leave them dejected, demotivated, and say that this career path is no longer an option for you. How do you talk them through that conversation?
I would say that most reps that think that way spend a stint in sales management, and then they figure out this isn't where I want to be, and they move to either a different part of the sales org, or a lot of them go back to being a rep. And to me, the easiest way to see if somebody likes a dish is you give them a taste. And so the team lead concept or the mentor buddy concept, like, all right, listen, I need you to spend time doing this instead of all the stuff that you usually spend time on that makes you successful. You still have to be successful in your day job too, but this is something that gives you a taste, right? So I'll never forget one of my best sellers ever worked with. We mentioned him recently on an episode, Riley Devine. I always wanted him to be a manager because I think he's a great leader, so smart, but he had tried it and it wasn't him. He didn't want to do that. And the way he got that was through a taste. So I would say that, listen, if you think that with 100% certainty you can tell if someone's going to be a manager that's effective or not, if you think that you have that level of certainty, you don't. So the easiest way is to have a program. We had a program at Outreach of like, how do we bring people into leadership? Part of that was giving them a taste. Most people, once they get a taste of it, if they hate it, they self-select out.
The giving someone a taste is a huge way to have a two-way door to management. Because once you put someone into a managerial role, what you probably have to do is you need to take reps away from another manager, put them under the new manager, and then you have to build all of that chemistry all over again. And that takes months and months for people to get into a working rhythm together. And if that person doesn't like it, the problem is they don't have a territory anymore. Yeah. And so now you're like moving reps, you're recarving books. There's the whole perception of, oh, why isn't this person a manager anymore? But I had one rep, her name was Morgan Laux, and awesome rep. And similar to you, I wanted her to be a manager so bad. And so for the longest time, everyone was trying to convince her to be a manager, and she was fine. I'll try it out. We gave her 2 reps, and we said for a month, you're on the hook for the pipeline reviews, the forecast calls, jumping on the calls, all that stuff. She did it. She was really good at it. But then she looked at us at the end of it and she was like, I hate this job.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm glad we gave it a shot.
Yeah.
Because if we just threw you into that role 3 months down the road and then you found out, you might have left the company. And that would be the worst case scenario.
Yeah. You never want to sacrifice a great rep on an experiment of being a manager. There's easier ways to see if they actually like the job and have the skills to get there than to just all of a sudden promote them. But I'll tell you this, there is an intense like pressure, or I don't know if it's like a part of the sales general thinking or hive mind or whatever that says, my job is to go from rep to manager.
Yeah.
That's how I make more money. That's how I become more successful. That is so opposite of the truth. The way that you make the most money is you stay a rep. Yeah. Great reps always make more money than great leaders, right? The way that you have more control of your time, you stay a rep, right? So part of it is there's certain people in your org that are telling you that they don't want to be a leader with their behavior, right? If they're overly money oriented, if they brag about, like Riley, great example, I don't know if he worked 20 hours a week, but it didn't matter because he crushed his number by 300% every single quarter. So I didn't give a crap how much he was working, right? But he wouldn't want to take the phone call at 9 o'clock at night to help get a deal done on the last day. Now, if it was his deal, he would, but if it was somebody else's, well, actually, Riley probably would have helped out. But you see what I'm saying? Like, the idea is that there's markers of behavior that tell you, do people have the sacrificial nature required to be a leader? Or is this just the next thing I do in my career is I become a manager?
I think the compensation misconception is a super, super common one. And just to give you guys real numbers as an example, I won't share my exact OTE, but if you assume that VP of sales is oftentimes top of the mountain before CRO, but some organizations don't have a CRO, then a VP of sales, depending on their experience, if they're less experienced, will make in the 400K range. If they're more experienced, 500 plus, right? If you're an enterprise rep, if you assume that's the top of the mountain, and you're a good enterprise rep at a good organization, you're usually looking at the 300s of OTEs, right? So you're like, oh, that means the VP of sales gets paid more, right? Well, that's actually incorrect. So let's say you're a VP of sales making 400 grand. What is the highest attainment mark you have ever seen for a VP of sales?
Maybe 130%, maybe?
130%. What's the highest attainment you've ever seen for an enterprise rep?
1,200%?
You will almost never make seven figures on a W-2 as a VP of sales. It's just like, it's not going to happen. And the reason for that is the moment you do 200% of your number as a VP of sales, your board is like, you sandbagger? Yeah. It's like, what target did you set so that the average rep on your team is doing double their number? Your number is going to double next year. And guess what? You're going to be at 80% of your number next year. Yeah. Versus as an enterprise rep, it pays to be an outlier. You can have $1 million or $2 million quota, a $3 million quota. You close one $10 million deal, you're at 300%. On a 300K OTE with accelerators, you're knocking on the door of $1 million paycheck. And so to be clear, the cash side, the OTE sounds higher, and it usually is. But if you are a top rep, it pays way more to stay in enterprise. And on top of that, the freedom is substantially and more. And so, look, you're going to be on the hook for all the meetings, all the executive meetings, all the board calls, all of those things, versus a rep can just, if they've hit their number, and they can relax a little bit more. And I think the reason that you get into sales leadership is not for those other things, but it's because fundamentally what gets you excited, what gets you up in the morning, is not lighting up the leaderboard yourself, but seeing other people light up the room.
Yeah.
And that's what was more exciting to me. The rep job actually became boring. I got tired of hitting the numbers myself, but I never got tired of watching other people hit their goals.
I felt like my pace of learning slowed down so much as I became a better and better rep that I didn't feel like I was growing. And I'll never forget the copy machine I was standing at in a school in Mercersburg, PA, and I just heard it like a divine voice. Mark, you're tired of developing accounts. You want to develop people. And I was just like, yes, this is what I want to do. And so the reason I went into sales leadership wasn't because of the money. It's because I was tired of developing accounts. They were too fickle for me. I wanted to create real relationships with people.
So let's talk about your process once you've identified someone who would be a good manager. How do you groom them up, test them, and take them from rep to manager?
Yeah. So first we talked about giving a taste, right? So in your program, you're going to take 2 to 3 slivers of a sales manager's daily job, and you're going to break that down into those little tastes for the rep. For example, for us, one was coaching, right? So we knew our managers, had a huge coaching culture. You needed to coach. So you would get set up with a little pod of 2 to 3 reps, and your job was once a week to do an hour-long film session with just those people. They only had to put an hour into it, maybe a little bit of prep, maybe a little bit of follow-up afterwards, but they were getting a taste of what does it mean to be on the hook to coach every single week, 3 reps for reps that are thirsty for that knowledge and need to get improvement, right? So that was one. The second one that we did was around forecasting. So as a rep, we would bring you in to the forecasting meetings, and you would work with your manager on how to prepare the forecast. And then you may present it every once in a while to get an idea of what is all the work that's involved around reporting up and helping the business understand how things are going, which is another key thing. And then the third way was with more of these soft skills. We would be like, okay, your job is to run this part of the team meeting. And you know what? It might not be that valuable. It might be something that you're like not that interested in, but you still have to talk about. Like it's that crappy part of the job that you have to just get up and do and you have to be into, otherwise it falls completely flat. So those are 3 things that we did. We siphoned off like some key score skills, coaching, forecasting, and then the cultural team building type of stuff to a rep and let them try that. And then that's like the first step is the siphoning off the skills.
So you've got coaching, forecasting, and then we'll just call it like team building or skill building maybe across the entire team. Where do you find that most candidates struggle the most?
A candidate struggles the most is when you don't give them a slice that they aren't aligned to. Right now, that is a double-edged sword, right? Because let's say somebody's really good at numbers and you're like, okay, we're going to have this rep try some forecasting stuff, which is like helping them grow and understand, put them in their strength. That person probably is going to be good at that, but they have to be good at all the other stuff too, right? So what you want to do is you want to start them in a place where they can build some early momentum. I know that, I got this. I'm starting to feel it. Then what you want to do is you want to kind of put the brakes on it and put them in something that's outside of where they're at. So numbers person might not be a great team builder. All right, if you're going to be a great leader, you can't just live in the numbers. You can't live in a spreadsheet. You got to live with your team on the floor doing this stuff. So now we're going to have you try this. And so that's how we would start to understand, does the person have like the breadth of skills and the breadth of knowledge to start to attack this multifaceted job, or are they just kind of a one-trick pony good at one thing?
So you're giving them a couple of these different tastes. How long does this period typically last? Yeah,
so we usually would do a quarter. So, hey, listen, we have these 3 manager positionings opening up in the next 2 to 3 quarters. We think that you are a candidate that we want to develop into that. There's going to be an interview process. You never guarantee them the job at that point. There's going to be an interview process, but we prefer to hire and develop internally versus hire externally. You're one of the people. This is where we've done it. We want to give you a quarter to do this. And about halfway through the quarter is when we might transition to that second idea. And then by then we have a good idea of whether we want to bring them into the interview loop or if they've self-selected out.
How much of this is you allow anyone to raise their hands for the role versus you're picking the people who you know should be managers?
I mean, I think this is a really personal question. I personally believe if you discourage people from raising their hand and don't show that you pay attention when people raise their hand, I think there's a lot of stuff that falls off the cart. If you think you can do it, raise your hand and we'll talk through it and see what we can do about it. I think if you ignore hand raises, people subconsciously think that you're ignoring other parts of them too. And it's really hard to build a relationship with somebody that ignores parts of you.
So let's say that you have a bunch of people who are raising their hands and there are some reps where you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Talk to me about what might not make sense. Is it a certain amount of time and role?
Yes.
Is there a certain amount of street cred they've built on the team? Is it a certain attainment that you're looking for? Like, how do you know if someone should even make it to the test?
Yeah, so we very much had a career progression path. Each jump from a different position had what you had to be doing in your current position to be eligible to do it. So you can't raise your hand if you've missed quota 3 quarters in a row, right? Yeah. And so you can't raise your hand if you have the lowest win rate on the team. There's certain standards that have to be met in order for you to be considered for a role. But this is really critical. Career progression paths automatically create entitlement and expectations. When you put out a path and you don't think through it the entire way, what happens is your whole org starts to think, if I just do these things, I get the promotion. And then what happens if you have 5 people do it, but you only have 1 position opened up? So you have to be really careful in saying what our career progression path does is it brings you to the front of the line, which I think we've talked about before. It brings you to the front of the line. It doesn't get you in the club. But being at the front of the line gets you in the club faster once we're ready to open it up. But that's something that has to be very clearly explained is career progression doesn't get you the job. It gets you an opportunity to get the job. If you don't do these things in the career progression path, then we're going to have to find external candidates to get in there.
How do you think about whether or not you should go external?
Sometimes when you're looking across your leadership team, and I did this several times, but I think by the end at Outreach, I had 20 some managers, 3 or 4 directors, 2 or 3 VPs. For me at that point, at that scale, it's like, where do I have holes? And does somebody on my team who is eligible to be moved up, can they plug a hole of the skill set and the diversity of thought that we need? So if you're in a smaller org, to me, I think what it comes down to is I think that setting a precedent of internal promotion into paths is a very strong precedent to set. And it says a lot about your loyalty to people and how you respond to great performance. And are you sticking people in roles and keeping them there forever? I made this mistake at Outreach in the beginning. I originally said I'm never going to hire or promote an SDR into an AE job because they're 2 different jobs. And like, why would I do that? And I missed out on some great AE talent in the first couple of years because people got tired of being an SDR and moved on somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And so I think that you have to show that early on, but the way that you know that you need to do it outside is there's an urgency that doesn't allow for someone to grow into the role. So if, oh gosh, we have to hit these numbers, they're out of control. If we don't get a good manager in here now, we won't hit the number. Then you have to figure out, all right, does that mean that we don't have enough time to grow this rep into the role? Because anybody that doesn't know how to do job needs to be given the space to grow into it. They're not going to be awesome on day one versus somebody from the outside has a potential to know the mechanics of the job better. And along with a good team of reps can learn the stuff that they don't. But I will tell you a very interesting study my buddy Stan Hansen did at Pluralsight. He did a 2-year-long study and he looked at internal management hires versus external management hires. And he found that internal hires ramped 85% faster than external hires, even if they were hired when they weren't quite ready for the job. And so I think that institutional tribal knowledge is just really important.
It is so important where you just think about, look, you can learn a sales process, you can learn how to run discovery calls and all that stuff. You can take the trainings, watch the calls, coach the calls. But there is something different about having run 200 sales cycles yourself. And I think about my time at Pave, and part of the reason I had so much street cred was because people could look back and listen to my cold calls. Yeah. They could watch my sales calls. And then I could step onto a floor and I could pinpoint the exact time that someone should have asked a certain question. And then when we had some external managers jump on board, I would say that they developed that level of street cred. Early on, they had respect and they could dig into a forecast, they could dig into process stuff. But to really hands-on be able to coach a rep on a deal, I would say it took at least 6 months.
Yes.
Solid 6 months.
And I think we're going to end up doing a future episode on street cred because it's like this untalked about superpower that like supercharges everything. But I would say one basic job of a manager is to make sure people know that you have street cred. Like when you walk down the street, you need to look like my man, Connor. What's his last name? The UFC guy?
Conor McGregor.
Yeah, they need to walk around Conor McGregor. Yeah. This is how much street cred I got, right?
Let's talk about this because I think this is another part of your process before we wrap, which is building your squad.
Yeah.
So they do the taste, rather. And the other thing that you're looking for is that, frankly, other people are looking to them to help them. And so what does that look like?
I would say that besides efficacy, this is the number one thing that I teach people as they want to move up in their sales career into management is you have to have a squad. That means like what reps are following you when you go. Like when Nate Broom went to Captivate IQ, he took his ops guy, his number one manager, and his top 3 or 4 reps. Like when I went to Catalyst, I took my top 2 managers and my top 3 or 4 reps. Like I would have taken my ops guy, but he was going with Nate, so that sucked. But listen, you have to have your squad, and your squad is part of your value as a sales leader. If you don't have a squad, then you get plopped into a situation and you have to do everything yourself. When I went to Catalyst and I had Alex and Clara there, and then we brought in Kurt to be one of our awesome reps and Mohammed then. And so what ended up happening is I don't have to get people to believe in me as much anymore because other people are getting them to believe in me. And that belief in a sales manager is what allows you to create change. People are always going to be resistant of change. The only way to break them down is to make them think it's their own idea or for them to believe in you. And so getting everybody to think everything's their own idea is a little bit dangerous and it's very difficult. Getting people to believe in you isn't that hard as long as you just show up consistently. But that's a really important part of street cred is that it gets people to believe in you.
Amazing show, man. We talked about the following things to recap. We talked about the job of a sales manager, how it's all about efficacy, but also it's about building your squad. From there, we talked about the characteristics that you look for. And the number one thing that we talked about is that conscious competence.
Yeah.
Do you understand why you are doing and why it is driving change, why it is effective? From there, we talked about the importance of using taste tests and not just throwing people into manager roles. And oftentimes you're going to do those things over a quarter. And then throughout that process, you need to see 1, do they like it? 2, are they good at it? And then 3, are they able to build their squad? In other words, do people start to flock to them or are people like, oh, this isn't sort of working? And then lastly, we talked about a couple of common mistakes with the super reps, not letting everyone apply and little things that you can do that create friction within your org. And so folks, that's a wrap here. If you liked what you got out of this one and you are trying to build your own sales manager toolkit, we actually put together a full guide on how to put together a sales forecast. And oftentimes I find that is one area that managers will really struggle with for the first time is you can oftentimes mentor someone, you can coach a call and all of that stuff, but you really struggle to figure out how to dig in across 20 deals when you're not in all of those deals. And so I wrote that up in our newsletter a while back and there is a link to that down in the show notes and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.